Good afternoon. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Fridays, we talk about what we call the healing circle, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Dr. Breveda Garrett-Akansanya. She won't be in today, and Dr. Oliver Williams. And today we're going to continue a conversation that we began last week with Sister Mildred D. Muhammad. And the topic got a lot of energy, a lot of response. Thank you all for responding, because it's an important topic, topic of domestic abuse, domestic violence. We're going to continue on that today. But before we get there, I want to invite you to support this program, support this building of community, these relationships we're creating among us. We want you to go over to the YouTube platform, YouTube Insight channel, and subscribe to our program. Subscribe to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. You may be watching us on the NNPA YouTube, which is great, Black Press USA. You could be watching us from Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook on a couple of different platforms, and we appreciate the capacity to reach you in places that you are, that makes sense for you. But we're going to ask you to take one extra step today and to take a minute and go over to YouTube, Insight News channel. You'll find this program, and we want you to subscribe. We have about 300 or so subscribers right now. We want to build that to about 1,000. And we want to do that one subscriber at a time. That's why I'm talking to you and asking you, inviting you to bring your voice, your ideas, your energy to support this work of building community. Well, we're going to be talking momentarily to Senator Tina Smith, one of the two U.S. senators from Minnesota. And the things I want to share with her or ask her to share with you include her impressions of what happened at President Joe Biden's State of the Union. He covered a lot of territory, and I think covered it in a very powerful way. I would say that speech was a home run, and it was such a home run, it exceeded everybody's expectations. I also say that I was paying attention to the fact that after he finished the presentation, the speech got the ovation of all of the people in the representatives and the guests who were in the chamber. As they always do, this president walked down into the chamber floor and began greeting, leaders in the Congress and others who were there, like the Supreme Court and some military. And one thing I noticed was that he, this time, and I was surprised and pleased, spent a lot of time, personally greeting, talking to, shaking hands with, hugging Black legislators. I think it was conspicuous that he did that. I think it was significant that he did it. I think he was signaling to us, the Black community, and I think signaling to the world that he's intent on addressing, correcting, moving our community, our body politic toward what it should be, and that he was not operating with a sense of entitlement or a sense of being able to or wanting to be dismissive towards Black interest in Black people, or taking our people, our vote, our representatives for granted. So I say kudos to the president for that. Well, Senator Smith is here, and Senator, so good to see you. Welcome to the conversation. How are you?
Thank you, Al. I'm just so glad to be with you. And it's a great day. It's a beautiful day in Minnesota. And I had a fantastic conversation this morning with a great panel talking about the work we need to do to build Black wealth. So having a chance to speak with you this afternoon feels really resonant.
Well, let's talk about that. I got your press release on that this morning, just a few minutes ago. As part of Black History Month, you facilitated a panel discussion with community leaders focusing on building Black wealth. So talk about that. What happened? How did that go? What was the motive and what was the outcome as you think of it right now, moments out of that important presentation?
Well, on the Martin Luther King Day events that the governor and lieutenant governor organized, the whole event was focused on building Black wealth. And so I wanted to build on that and to have a conversation in community about the great work that is being done, but also to really understand what more we need to do. And we had some terrific leaders, including Warren McLean from Neon, and Adair Mosley from African American Leadership Forum, and the new head of the Independence Bank, the first Black-owned bank to be located in a Black-owned bank to be located in the Twin Cities, and several other great panelists. So it was excellent to hear them talking about how the work that we need to do needs to be focused. We need to focus particularly on Black lives and Black community. We also talked a lot about how much our work needs to be rooted in a place and focused in that way on the work that we need to do to expand access to home ownership and capital and credit and educational opportunities to overcome these deep systemic historic structures that limit opportunity for Black people.
You are delivering in that capacity, it seems to me, Senator. Take a minute to talk about what you've done in supporting funding for critical local projects, including Hallie Q. Brown and Rondo Community Land Trust, also the Harriet Tubman Center. Talk about what's going on with those and what you've been able to deliver.
Well, those are the perfect examples of community-led projects, great ideas that are developed in community. And then those organizations bring those ideas to me and to Senator Klobuchar and to others. And then we work to get them funded through the federal budget. And we were very successful this year. I'm quite proud to be able to get funding for the Rondo Community Land Trust, which will help them to build out permanently affordable commercial space and residential space in the old and new Rondo neighborhood. And then the Hallie Q. Brown project.
And that one is $1 million for the land trust, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Al. That's exactly right. Again, that's an idea that they brought to us.
Yeah.
And I love it that they don't have to figure out how to apply for the money. They don't have to go through a bunch of grant making process, which frankly makes it very difficult for many grassroots and community organizations to apply, because how do they even know what's available? Let alone do they have the time and the capacity and the resources to apply for them. So
are these called earmarks? Is that what they mean?
They are what we used to call earmarks. Nobody wants to call them that anymore. I think of them as community-based projects, but it is the same thing. It allows members of Congress to say, here's a project in my local community that I think is worthy of funding. And I have to say, we've also reformed the process so that those dollars are going to public sector or nonprofit sector organizations whose job it is to serve the community, not to big companies that don't need our help right now.
And does it work, Senator Smith, that both senators and members of the House can bring projects forward like that? Or is it just the Senate or just the House?
No, absolutely. It works. And we always work together whenever we can. Certainly, Representative Omar and I have done lots of these, supported lots of these projects together. And usually community-based organizations will bring their projects to all of us. And then we can help make sure that they are supported both by the U.S. House and by the U.S. Senate, which makes it easier for us to get them approved at the end of the day.
So you got, I think, $850,000 to support the Harriet Tubman Center. That's huge.
It's such a huge thing, and an organization that has demonstrated its capacity to serve people with great need when they are dealing with issues around domestic violence, sex trafficking, and what they need is resources. Adair Mosley, who I really respect so much at the African American Leadership Forum and used to be at Pillsbury United, says that leadership is putting great ideas into action. And I think my job in the Senate is to help community leaders have the resources
Mhm.
to make that happen.
Mhm. Hallie Q. Brown, 1.789 million. Whoa, great. What's
It's
going to
so
happen with that?
It's so great. That is a place that is such a resource to the community. The last time I was at Hallie Q. Brown, it was there to listen to a amazing group of elders talk about the work, talk about what the old Rondo neighborhood was like and how they see us building forward into a new future for Rondo. Just absolutely love that. The resources that we got for Hallie Q. Brown will be used to build out their child care and early learning centers. And boy, do we not know how important that is, especially after the pandemic. It was important before the pandemic, but with a huge shortage of affordable, high quality places for our littlest ones to be able to, be safe and learn and grow is really important. And I have great faith in what they're going to be able to do with those dollars.
How pleased are you that the Improving Access to Behavior Health Integration Act was included in the omnibus bill that was signed into law in December?
Well, of course, that's been a big priority of mine. I was really proud to introduce that bill, bipartisan bill. And the idea is to reinforce the work of local healthcare providers to integrate mental health care into physical health care. Of course, we all are one person. Our physical and our mental health are inextricably intertwined and are all part of the same thing. But not often, not too rarely, are doctors and clinics really in a position to be able to integrate both sides of that care. And our bill is designed to help, especially family practice providers, be able to bring in mental health care into their practice, so that if you are a provider that you are, you're treating a 10-year-old, say, and you can see that 10-year-old has burgeoning mental health challenges, you have the ability to make sure that child can be treated in that setting that they already know and trust before hopefully their mental health issues become greater and harder to treat.
You heard me open the show giving kudos to President Biden for what I thought was a stellar, powerful, impactful, visionary, and well-delivered State of the Union. And I wanted to get your impressions as our closing part of this interview. But before I do that, let me just show a clip of about a minute or so of his presentation. And I thought it was courageous of him to talk about the courage of the family of the young man that was killed by the police in Memphis, Tyree Nichols. Let's check that out, and then we'll come back and ask you for a final comment.
I had to bury Tyree last week. As many of you personally know, there's no words to describe the heartache or grief of losing a child. But imagine if you lost that child at the hands of the law. Imagine having to worry whether your son or daughter came home from walking down the street, playing in the park, or just driving a car. Most of us in here have never had to have the talk that brown and black parents have had to have with their children. Bo, Hunter, Ashley, my children, I never had to have the talk with them. I never had to tell them, if a police officer pulls you over, turn your interior lights on right away. Don't reach for your license. Keep your hands on the steering wheel. Imagine having to worry like that every single time your kid got in a car. Here's what Tyree's mother shared with me when I spoke to her. When I asked her how she finds the courage to carry on and speak out. The faith of God, she said her son was, quote, a beautiful soul, and something good will come of this.
Boy, whew.
I know.
That was powerful. I mean, I was riveted. It was riveting. And that's kind of why I call it a home run. It addresses something that's so fresh, so high in the public mind at the moment, and has been and should be. And to hear him be empathetic in a way that we don't see often enough was both healing and refreshing. What were the highlights of that? We'll respond to that particular item, but
Yeah.
your other highlights you thought of the State of the Union?
Well, I think your choice of the word empathy is just exactly right. President Biden has a capacity for empathy and the strength of character to display that empathy in ways that we need so desperately right now. It connects us all to our shared humanity. The other thing that he did so powerfully in that moment, and I, of course, was on the floor of the House and was able to witness that, is to help white people understand what it is to have a child, your child who is Black, driving, and what it means when they're stopped by police, and how families have to explain to their 16-year-old, their 17-year-old, what to do in order to keep themselves safe, and in some ways sometimes keep themselves alive. I, of course, thought right away of my friendship and the way that I have gotten to know Valerie Castile, whose son Philando was killed by police. And I think about Valerie all the time. Just like Tyree Nichols' parents, she has put her grief and her loss into service of what Philando would have wanted, and to make the world a better place. She's channeled her grief into making the world a better place. And which I just so deeply respect. For Valerie, it is about making sure, just as Philando served meals to children in the school where he worked, in the lunchroom, that children all over Minnesota and all over the country should never be shamed because they can't afford their school meal. And it really led me and Representative Omar to work together Valerie inspired us to work together on our no shame school lunch bill. That is an example of how great tragedy and loss, justice, it's hard to say that justice is served, but it is possible to say that a good thing can come from a terrible, unspeakable tragedy.
Tina, thank you so much for being here. Senator Smith, thank you so much for your work, your leadership, and for stopping by. You're welcome here anytime. And again, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Al. And you can call me Tina anytime. It makes me happy.
All right. Then, take care.
Take care. Thank you.
Okay. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane, Friday, The Healing Circle. And that's a great conversation, but it's a great segue into the balance of the program. Last week, we met Sister Mildred Muhammad, who's a speaker, an organizer, a thinker, a leader, but also a victim of domestic abuse. And we got started in an important discussion on the nature, the expansiveness, and the horrific experience that many people in our community, women in particular, feel domestic abuse and domestic violence. Her story is not unique, but maybe highest profile possible. She was the wife of John D. Muhammad, I think the name is right, who we know and came to know as the DC sniper, who killed 10 people on a shooting spree, wounded others, I believe, but all in and with the intent of killing his wife. She's here to talk about that and to talk about the tragedy, the horror of domestic abuse, domestic violence, and how we have to address it. Also here is my colleague, our friend and elder leader, Dr. Oliver Williams. Dr. Williams and Sister Muhammad, good afternoon, and thank you both for being here. Good to see you both.
Good to see you, Al. Good to see you, Mildred.
Well, let me tell our viewers that we thought and we think this conversation is so timely and so critical, so important, that we cleared our calendars for Fridays for the next couple of weeks. So we're going to sit and take time, Sister, to give you time to speak to issues that are important to you. I think we see ourselves as facilitating and responding and helping shape this conversation in our community, because it's one that we have to be trained to have. So our mission here is to elevate your voice and your experience and the wisdom, the teaching that you are doing around this question of domestic abuse and domestic violence. And with us, Dr. Oliver and me as a journalist, trying to ensure that we are inviting our community to embrace vocabularies that allow us to articulate our experiences as well, in ways that lead to healing and peace in our lives, in our families, and in the world. Sister Mildred, good afternoon, first of all, and I'll start with you just to say what's on your mind.
Sir. I'd like to just make a tiny adjustment to the description that you gave me. I was a victim who became a survivor, and now I am a warrior on the issue of domestic violence. And many people confuse that I was John's wife. I was his ex-wife at the time. Okay. And the reason why I make that such an important distinction is because up to 75% of victims who try to leave an abusive relationship are either hurt or killed. Worse, 2000. The shootings took place September of 2002. I was in hiding, changed my name, changed my clothes, very mindful of my surroundings, and hiding for 2 years of my life. And so he found me in DC in the DC area in 2002, and that is when the shootings began. So I had already already given the children legally, and I had a restraining order, a lifetime restraining order legally, and he still came after me. So even when you try to leave, that does not mean that the abuse is over. The most dangerous person in the world is someone who has nothing to lose. A restraining order is a piece of paper. It is not a bulletproof vest. It is not going to keep anybody away from you who is intent and is willing to sacrifice their own future to make sure that that person doesn't breathe again.
Well, I'm going to ask you to just sit in that a little bit longer, Sister Muhammad. Thank you for the corrections. Those were not minor, they were major. And that's what we want you to do, is to make sure that what we are saying is clear and right and accurately describes the story and the experience. And so take more time, just take more time and go into, the story and the observations as the story was unfolding, and in retrospect. Even go into the story of what you expected and desired when the relationship began, when you were married, and before you decided to leave. What was life like? What were the dreams that you held and that you thought your family held? And where did things take a turn to where they went?
Well, just like in any marriage, when you get married, you don't get married to get divorced. You get married to stay married until death do you part, physical death do you part. I learned in that process that sometimes death can do you part emotionally, and where you have to move away from that person in order to save your own mental health and your physical well-being. The things changed when he came back from Desert Storm. And that's what happens to many soldiers who return from a war zone. They're not the same people anymore. You hear that all the time. He was diagnosed with PTSD, and he was not debriefed. The resources that they have for PTSD right now, those resources were not available to soldiers at that time. So they had to try to figure out what was going on and why. And many spouses at that time were being abused, but were fearful of saying anything because in the military, if you have a mental illness or any type of disorder on your record, you cannot be promoted. And many soldiers wanted to retire
Mhm.
in the military, as did John. And so that was something that you just didn't talk about, or if you went to get help, then the help wasn't there for you, not as a
And,
spouse,
and
because
it had a
militaries are
negative
soldiers,
economic
and if it's a problem,
to come forward
if
would
it's a
have a
problem, it's
negative economic
spouse. Correct.
consequence on him as well, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Go
And so
back if you
once
would.
the
Go back if you
Mhm.
would to telling his story before he went into the military that you know of. Who was
well,
he before he
when
went in the military? Because it seems to me the big issue is what happened to him in the military in Desert Storm that resulted in what
well,
happened
he
after.
was in the reserve. He was in the reserve. He wanted to go active duty, and so he took the test to go active duty, and then that's when he went into the service.
Mhm.
So he was a welder before or during his reserve time. But once he got into the military, then he was an 84th combat engineer. He could make a weapon out of anything, just like MacGyver. I'm pretty sure you remember MacGyver, right? Well,
Mhm.
that was John. He could do anything with everything. And so, with that type of skill, as a combat engineer, his duties were to, or his MOS, was to go into enemy territory, look for bridges and roads, blow them up, and then leave quietly so that they would not be detected.
Okay. And how long was he in Desert Storm? How long was his tour of duty? Do you remember?
He was in Desert Storm for 3 months. He left in January and came back in March because he had a shoulder injury. But when he came back, it was not the same.
What was
It
different?
doesn't, when you're trying to get help for, well, before going into Desert Storm, he was jovial. Everybody wanted to be around him. He was that go-to guy in case you needed help. I remember it was a soldier that traveled from Washington State to California, and he couldn't make it back for PT, physical training, that Monday morning. So John left Sunday afternoon, drove down there and picked him up and came back just in time to go to PT. So he was always there for the soldiers. I mean, he really believed that everybody's supposed to look out for each other. He was always fun, always laughing, always happy. But when he came back, it was like somebody flipped a switch and he just wasn't as open, didn't want to communicate much. And if he did, it was very one worded. He started to get very possessive, letting me know I couldn't go anywhere without him, or I had to stay home because of the time. So it wasn't a lot of places that you can go in terms of a military base. They were so far away from each other. So once the base that we were on was Benlock, and they closed Benlock. So we had to come back to the United States, and we ended up at Fort Ord, California.
Mhm. Let me bring our friend Dr. Oliver in just to join the conversation to give you a second. And, we want to follow you in this conversation, Sister Mildred, and go where you
Mhm.
want to go in terms of sharing and presenting. Dr. Oliver Williams, brother, good afternoon. Good to see you again.
Good
And
afternoon, brother.
yeah, just jump in where you want and, provide, either questions or comments or direction so that we can, strengthen the capacity of this meeting to be part of the meaning making in our community.
Well, Mildred and I have known
Mhm.
each other for a little bit. So among the things
We have.
that I think about is her capacity as a mother, and the
Mhm.
fact that she's been raising these children so well. And in addition, how you end up making the connection with your children after you have a person who's behaved so badly, but also someone whose children loved him, and also the young man that was his co-conspirator, how he got involved in it, and you know, Mildred really has a story to tell associated with that. But I think the big thing to me is her stance as a mother, and how she's loved her children back to being supported and connected with someone who's a healthy representative, you know, and a healthy parent. So, you know, those are conversations that I'd like for us to have with her, because I think she's got a lot of wisdom and a lot to share with other women who may be going through a challenge with their children. So, Mildred, could you speak a little bit to that?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I had to, my children were taken for 18 months out of the country. And when I got them back, they were not communicating with me very well, especially my son, our son. I never spoke badly to them about their dad. Never, ever. I did not then, and I don't now. I don't believe that a child should have to choose which parent to love more. And so when I got back, I didn't ask them where they were. What did you do? What did your dad do? I just waited for them to communicate with me. And it usually came after we're watching TV and a commercial will come on, and that would remind them of where they were. And that's when they say, oh, mommy, we was in Antigua. Okay, so didn't know that. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, so how do I cultivate that conversation? Oh, well, what did you over there? Because I did them to get defensive. And so I learned a lot in that conversation with them. My son was the hardest one with me because his dad really worked on him. And he really made him feel that I did not want or love him, but I love the girls more. And I remember sitting down on the sofa journaling. And my son came in and he said, you want to know what Dad said? I said, well, yeah. He said, Dad said you didn't want me. Dad said you wanted to live the rest of your life without me. He said that you love the girls more than me.
Wow.
And you didn't want us. He said, you told him to take us because you didn't want to have anything else to do with us. And you wanted to live your life without your children. I said, is that all your dad said? He said, well, yeah, it's a lot, but you know, I don't want to hurt you. I said, well, I'm a big girl. I can take it. He said, no, Mom, that's it. I said, okay. So I did look for you. I showed them the 1-800 number I set up. I showed them the website that I set up to look for them. I said, I knew your dad was going to work on you more than he worked on the girls. I said, but this is what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to compare what I do to what your dad said. If you find that I'm doing something that he said that I do, talk to me so that I can explain why I do those things. And if you find that I'm doing something, what he said, talk to me so that you can understand and why I do things. I have always loved you. I've never wanted you and your sisters to be out of my life. I love all, and I've always looked for you, and I can show you the evidence that you can see that what I'm saying is the truth. I say, but let me ask you this. What can I do to make your life better? He said, if you could just spend more time with me and talk to me and hug me, I will feel better. I say, well, we can start that right now. So every week, each one of them picked a day that was their day. And so the others couldn't go with us on our day. And that's how I was able to emotionally reconnect with my children so that they can see that the things that their dad said about me was not true. But I would not speak to them about that. I loved him. And he is their dad. And nothing that he did and nothing that anyone will change that he is their dad. That's how we went
We're
to
having
come.
a
We
little
went to
challenge,
movies in some
a little
barbershop.
latency on the
Now,
on this live stream here.
but they didn't know that Eve going to say about the DC. And she said, but he said,
Let me do this. Your sound is breaking up a
sorry.
little bit, Sister Mildred, and want to see if we can work on that. But let me share, just for those who are joining the program late, the context of this conversation. And I pulled up a story published in October of 2021 in Wink News. It's an interview with you. And the headline was "Ex-Wife of DC Sniper Talks About Domestic Abuse Before the Shooting Rampage." And again, for background, Wink News wrote that, open quote, domestic violence can impact anyone at any age and under a variety of circumstances. Mildred Muhammad, our guest, is the ex-wife of the DC Sniper. She said her husband went on a deadly 3-week rampage as practice, and she was the real target. Mildred's scars weren't physical, rather emotional ones that ran deep. It quotes her as saying, "I didn't move past it, I healed through it." She can pinpoint the moment her relationship with her then husband changed. When he wanted to keep his eldest son and not return him to his first wife, open quote, he felt like I did not take his side and therefore did not deserve anything, she explained. And after seeing a public service announcement on TV, she realized that she was a victim. Ultimately, she divorced John Muhammad and got a lifetime restraining order, but there are still visitations included in the process. Uh, uh, what she feared, the article says, was that her ex-husband, got the opportunity he needed to take their 3 children and leave the country, and he was supposed to bring them back, she says, on a Sunday night, but then they were gone for 18 months. She ended up in the hospital because she couldn't eat or sleep, and somehow he was kind of watching her. And the scary part, according to this article, as I read this article, is her comment that she says, he called and I said, "Why won't you let the children call me?" He said, "We don't always get what we want, do we?" So she goes on to say, he had already told me that you have become my enemy, and as my enemy, I will kill you. Wow. That's the story. There's more, but it's hard to read and difficult to be in this conversation about it. I'm so grateful and thankful that she has the courage, and as she said, she is now a survivor and a warrior. And that warriorship, that warrior attitude, is something that we have to celebrate. Dr. Williams, come in and just kick it with me for a minute. We're trying to get an improved signal for Sister Muhammad, but this gives you and me a chance, 2 Black men, to talk about this question of how we, Black men, and it's not just us, but in most cases, Black men, become abusers and perpetrate violence on the people that we say we loved.
Yeah. Well, Mildred to me is a good example of a woman that has been self-evaluated. I've known Mildred for quite a while, and we've had a chance to sort of know each other during the time that she was resolving some of these things and thinking through these different sets of issues. and a lot of wisdom she has associated with that to share with other women and other women in the military, but also other women who are battered women in the world. And the thing that I think about is there is a woman named Mary Hernandez who was married to a brother named Dominique Waltower. And both of them made the decision to get divorced because they felt like it was healthier for them, and that they had 3 children that they were raising. And they decided, and one of the things that Dominique, and we should actually have him on the show too, he talks about what he's done to be able to get a handle on what it meant to be a bad parent.
Mm.
And one of the wisdoms that Dominique had and Mary has is they got what Dominique calls a Yelp review about the way they behaved as parents. And he says that the kids told him that they sucked as parents, and that he needed to find ways to reconcile that. And the thing that's interesting about Dominique's work and Mary, his ex-wife's work, because they both work doing things around domestic violence, is that they end up not doing it for the purpose of getting back together with each other. They do it for the purpose of being able to have other people sort of understand the challenges associated with it. So the work that Dominique does, he does to be able to get other men to take responsibility for their behavior and to acknowledge their behavior and then change their behavior, not for the purpose of trying to reconnect, with a partner or ex-partner. And I would say that to women who are victims of abuse, for some men and most men who are batters, they're not going to change because they're with you. They have to change themselves and heal themselves first. And then actually, many men move on to another partner and not visit the same violence and abuse onto their former partner. And I think that's the thing that one needs to consider. And women need
So you're saying healing is possible. First, I heard you say if they've been battering, they're going to keep battering. But now you're saying healing is possible, but there have to be some steps taken, right? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And I guess the other thing I think about is the fact that he may never change with her, but on the other hand, the one reality is that he needs to change for himself if he changes. Some men may never change. Some men may change, but they may not change during the time that he's with the person that he's abusing. And he shouldn't continue to visit that on her, nor should it be an expectation that she's in the circumstance, because a lot of people who end up committing murder don't know that they're going to commit murder to the victim. And a woman needs to be in a safe place. So I've heard, some people say, well, men never change. And my qualification around that is they may never change during the time that they're with the victim of abuse. But the fact that is that there are some men who do change. And there's some men that I've met with, but when I met with them and I met with their partners. I don't take his word by itself. Mm-hmm. You have to have some validation associated with that. And when I've met with the female partners, it's been interesting. And with Mary, Dominique's ex-wife, her comment was the fact that she saw that he changed, but he changed. She noticed that he changed when he did the things that he said he was going to do. Mm-hmm. and associated with not being violent and abusive, and to be able to take responsibility for the children, to be able to do the things that they knew that he needed to do to be different, and to follow up, and again to take responsibility for those things, primarily not to be violent and abusive emotionally or physically, or to intimidate her. Many men who are abusive men end up using children to be able to get back at the female partner. And so, and there's stories.
And that's what happened in this case, really, in Sister Mildred's case, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Right.
I think we got her back. I think she's back. We're trying to get a better signal. Let's see how we're doing now. We might not, but at least you're back. Sister Mildred, jump back in.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, yeah, that was my children. And he said that he didn't take them because he wanted them. Not saying he didn't love them, but he took them to punish me. So if he felt that if he has the children, then I would come back. And I was in the hospital when he made that call. And as you were reading, you say, why won't you let the children call me? I had two choices. I could go back to him and die because he already said you have become my enemy. And as my enemy, I will kill you. Or I could hang up the phone and never see my children again. And I hung up the phone. And then that was a whole different process after that. I had to go in hiding at a shelter. I was there for 8 months. My sister and my mom were here. My sister called and said my mom was sick. That's when I moved to this area. Still went into hiding. Still didn't have my children. It wasn't until August of 2001 that I received a call stating that they knew where my children were, and I had to fly back to Tacoma, Washington for an emergency custody hearing. And I was awarded custody of the children. Came back to this area and still went into hiding because John knew how to track. He was in the military. He knew how to find me. I knew he was going to find me, but I couldn't get anybody else to believe me because I didn't have physical scars. 80% of victims don't have physical scars. What do you do with that? And so because we are a visual society, if I don't see your scars, then your scars don't exist. That's why you have the question, why do you stay? When you ask that question, and this is a very important point, when you ask a victim, why do you stay? What you're doing is you're putting the total responsibility of the abusive relationship on the victim, as if he or she left that situation, the abuse would stop. I left the situation and he still tracked me down, found me, and was trying to kill me. And so that's why it says up to 75% of victims who try to leave an abusive relationship are either hurt or killed, but society doesn't want to help. And I truly believe they are keeping domestic abuse and violence as a poverty issue so that the masses don't understand how serious this issue is for everyone. This affects every financial status, every gender, every occupation, but yet we don't want to talk about it. We don't talk about it until it hits the news, and then that's a bleep for about a couple of days, and after that, it's business as usual. Victims still need help. They're still not getting the help that they need. The shelters are still full. We're still in a pandemic. Women are still dying in teleworking. We don't want to talk about that. That's too depressing, right? We got other stuff to talk about.
Right. Mm-hmm. That is interesting to me too, Mildred, that it seems like every time the news picks up on the story, it's like a brand new event, and the situation is the same. But the people that are going through it may be unique to them at that moment, but it's a pattern that continues to happen, and we're not prepared for that. We don't prepare ourselves for that as a country as well as we could, and so the media can have another approach to say, well, it's going to happen again to somebody. What do we do about it? And having a paper trail, meaning when situations like this happen and you call the police and to be able to come out and see what's going on, is important to keeping those records, because it validates what women are saying in terms of the victimization. And so every time those circumstances happen, having something that supports, her truth around that is something that's really, really important to be able to do.
You both, I think, last week, Dr. Williams and Sister Muhammad, talked about this continuum, and I thought it was interesting and worth getting back into, sort of creating a sense of definition and awareness of the connection and the distinction between domestic abuse and domestic violence. They're on a spectrum. Would you both talk about that again? How do we get our minds around the continuum and how it shows up in different families and individuals' lives? Sister Mildred?
I'd like to address one thing going back to the news and how they report this. When I was going through my situation, I honestly thought that the media was the problem, but they're a part of it. I come to find out that it is law enforcement that gives the media the title of the case in which they report it to the public. And if the police says that it's just domestic dispute, then that's what it's, a domestic dispute. If it's slander, then it's slander. And until they come together, the police really start to address what it really is, then we're going to always be running around trying to get the correct headline to the story as it is. Domestic abuse is verbal, psychological, economic, spiritual, stalking. Domestic violence is a physical assault that takes place. 80% of victims fall in the category of domestic abuse. 20% fall in the category of domestic violence, a physical assault, spitting, slapping, hitting, throwing them up against the wall, mutilating, stabbing, shooting. That's physical. But verbal is the first offense to domestic abuse and violence, because it is the verbal assault that starts to groom the victim into a physical assault. So it could be verbal, or why are you doing this, or calling out of their names, not those little sweetie, honey, sugar pie, the B's and the W's, and all those other terrible words that they seem to call other people. The economic, I have the money, you got to bring me a receipt to show me how much money you spent. Now that's only for the victim, because the abuser can spend as much money as they want, but the victim, he or she tries to keep them on a leash in terms of how much money should they spend. And I want to make sure that men and women are victims, although 15% of the victims are men. That number is rising, and it's coming to the point where I'm not able to find the resources that they need. So until we start addressing this 363 issue, we're always running around trying to figure out what. 85%. I mean, you have the latest case is college student who wanted to talk to this girl. She said no, and she had a boyfriend, and she went and sat in the car with him. This other guy went to his friend and shot her multiple times.
Got a gun and shot her, right,
in the car, because she said no. Putting more are not taught, and they're not, most of them, how to handle rejection and disappointment. Automatically go to a violent rage,
your voice again,
and the
Sister
woman.
Mildred. Yeah, Sister Mildred, we're losing your voice again. And so, Dr. Oliver, this has been a great conversation. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. Let's do this between me and you. We'll bring Sister Mildred back in if we get the sound quality better. But over the next couple of weeks, what do you think we should be doing? How do we stay with this conversation? Are there natural elements or progressions of the conversation that make sense from your point of view as a leader of knowledge and solutions in the domestic abuse and violence treatment arena? What should we do next week and the following week so that we cover things the way that they can and should be in a way that's orderly?
Well, it would be interesting to me to be able to get voices of people who are doing the work, like Bishop Roderick Mitchell, that's in Mississippi, who grew up in a household where there was domestic violence, and he ends up working with churches, 34 churches around the issues of domestic violence, and a speaker and a leader around that. But also to be able to talk to some sisters that I know that have been victims of abuse, and they tell their story about it, and then to be able to talk to Dominique. Dominique is a person that I work with, and he's got 2 batters programs in San Diego. And the thing that's interesting with him is how forthright he is about taking responsibility associated with domestic violence, but also trying to work with other men to end their violence against women. And he works with the military. He's gone to Australia and done training, with folks there. So talking to children who've been exposed, talking to other women who've been victims of abuse, because they have quite a story, and they're reaching out to other women to be supportive of them. And then being able to talk about things that might be supportive in terms of healing for victims, but also for those men who transformed themselves. What are the keys? And not every man changes. A lot of men never change, or a lot of men never change while they're with the victim of abuse.
Let me thank Michelle Madison, who is a regular visitor and audience member for the program. She left a note just minutes ago that said she had a friend that suffered from domestic abuse. She was abused physically and mentally. She tried to relocate, and he found out where she was. She had to get a restraining order in 3 states. He eventually killed himself on a drug overdose. Sad situation. She says, Michelle, thank you for making the comment and for being part of the conversation. So what as you were talking, I'm thinking I'd like to reach out to our friend, Colonel Rabb, who's been on the program before, who was a career military person in the Army, but who is a licensed psychologist now, and worked with the Veterans Administration, who did tours of duty with mental health as his assignment, both in Afghanistan and in Iraq. So it'd be wonderful to have him sort of meditate on this conversation and give his observation. He's retired now as well.
Al, there's a colonel, retired Colonel Dexter Freeman, who was in charge for family advocacy around the world, particularly dealing with domestic violence. He sent me to Germany twice to work with the military associated with that. He would be a really good person to have a conversation.
Let's try to connect.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank Sister Mildred. I'm sorry that our technology, but we'll keep working it so that we'll have perfection. We're going to see you again next Friday and the Friday after that. And if we need to keep this thing going, we just keep it going because it's so important. It's too important not to talk about it. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. Thank you for being here, and we will see you next week. Take care.